Right here, right now, she asked. The human could barely speak, only nod. Ethan Vance had traveled to some of the loneliest corners of the galaxy in his life, but nothing had prepared him for this desolate planet. The sky was a dull orange, dust swirling across jagged rocks that jutted from the barren ground. There was no sign of life except for the occasional creaking of metal debris left over from long-forgotten conflicts. Ethan's ship had barely made the landing. The engines groaned and coughed in protest as he guided it onto a flat, cracked plateau. He stepped out, feeling the thin, dry air scrape at his lungs. The place was dead. He had received a weak distress signal from this sector, a faint message that had lasted less than a minute before cutting out. Most would have ignored it, assuming a malfunction or a trap, but Ethan had never been one to leave someone in danger. His life as a medic had taught him that even a small chance to help someone was worth taking. Walking over the rocky terrain, Ethan scanned the horizon. The signal's origin was close, maybe a few hundred meters away. He paused when something caught his eye, a figure lying motionless near a fallen structure. At first, he thought it might be a dummy or some sort of abandoned equipment, but as he moved closer, he saw the faint rise and fall of breathing. The figure was a woman, or at least humanoid. Her skin shimmered faintly under the dusty sunlight, an unusual iridescence that made her look almost unreal. Her clothing was torn, singed, and streaked with blood. Dark, jagged burns ran along her arms and legs, and a deep gash ran across her side. A thin trickle of liquid escaped from her mouth with each shallow breath. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had seen injuries before, but nothing like this. Whoever or whatever she was, she had survived some serious violence. He dropped his medical pack and knelt beside her. "Hey," he said gently, placing a hand near her shoulder. "Can you hear me? You're going to be okay. I'll help you." There was no response. Her chest moved in a shallow rhythm, her body trembling with pain. Ethan quickly assessed her injuries, his mind working fast. She had been hit with high-energy weapons, the kind used in military combat. Some burns were deep enough that he could see the tissue underneath. He swallowed hard, knowing that without immediate attention, she might not survive the night. Ethan started with what he could manage. He cleaned the deepest wounds with sterilized fluid, ignoring the sting in his own hands from the grit and blood. He applied bandages, wrapped her limbs as best he could, and improvised a splint for her broken arm using pieces of nearby metal. Each movement was careful. Any wrong touch could make her injuries worse. As he worked, he noticed something strange. Her pulse was strong and steady, far stronger than a normal human's. Her breathing, though shallow, was deliberate, controlled. Small, glowing symbols on her skin flickered faintly under the pressure of his fingers, as if the wounds themselves were alive. Ethan frowned, trying to make sense of it. This wasn't a human. He didn't recognize her species, but it was clear that she was extraordinary in some way. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time seemed to blur as he focused entirely on her. Ethan's hands were sore, his back ached, but he didn't stop. He felt a connection forming, a silent bond that often occurred when someone's life depended entirely on your skill and care. He gave her water, fed her small amounts of nutrient paste, and whispered reassuring words even when he wasn't sure she could understand. Eventually, the alien stirred. Her eyelids flickered, gold eyes opening just enough to reveal pupils like molten metal. For a brief second, Ethan froze, caught in the gaze of something so intense it made him feel both tiny and exposed. The woman, or queen, he would later realize, watched him carefully, measuring him, sensing him. She tried to speak, a series of strange, musical sounds that Ethan couldn't comprehend. He leaned closer, shaking his head. "I don't understand, it's okay. I'm here to help." Despite her injuries, she shifted slightly, testing her strength. Her movements were precise, deliberate, and far beyond what a human could manage. Ethan had to restrain a gasp as he realized the woman had incredible physical power, even in her weakened state. Every step she took, every slight motion of her hand, seemed calculated and aware, as if she were constantly analyzing everything around her. Suddenly, there was a faint noise in the distance, a hum, low and mechanical. Ethan's heart skipped. He had heard distant ships before, but this sounded purposeful hunting. He glanced at the alien woman. Her eyes followed his gaze, narrowing with awareness. Without words, she understood the threat. "We need to move," Ethan said softly, more to himself than to her. "They're coming." She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Her trust in him, formed over a few short hours, was clear. She allowed him to support her as they crawled toward a small crevice in the rocky terrain, a natural shelter that would provide some cover. Ethan set her down carefully, checking the bandages once more. "I need to know your name," he said. She hesitated, then whispered something in her language. It was short, elegant, almost melodic. He didn't understand, but he nodded anyway. "Okay, I'll call you Queen for now. Doesn't matter if that's right or wrong." The alien queen regarded him silently, her gold eyes observing every detail. There was a subtle flicker of amusement, as if she found his choice of name curious but not offensive. Ethan smiled faintly, despite the tension. It was strange how quickly bonds could form in moments of danger. The noise outside grew louder. Ethan peered over the edge of the crevice, spotting the faint shimmer of approaching ships. He realized the situation was far worse than he had first imagined. Whoever was hunting her was not ordinary. These were mercenaries, perhaps even bounty hunters, scanning the planet for her life sign. "We're not safe here for long," Ethan murmured. The Queen's hand brushed his shoulder lightly, a gesture that somehow communicated both trust and silent instruction. She seemed to understand the urgency as clearly as he did. Ethan gathered what supplies he could carry: medical kits, a few energy rations, a portable scanner. He knew that to survive, they would need to move quickly, using the terrain and their wits to stay ahead of the hunters. He glanced back at the Queen, who had shifted into a semi-upright position, her movements careful and deliberate despite her injuries. They started crawling along the rocky surface, keeping low and moving toward an area Ethan had noticed earlier, a narrow canyon that could provide cover. Every few steps, the Queen would pause, scanning the horizon with senses that Ethan could only guess at. She seemed to anticipate danger, moving in ways that suggested instinct and intelligence far beyond what he had ever encountered. Ethan could not help but marvel at her resilience. She had survived an attack that would have killed most beings instantly, and even now she remained alert and aware. Her strength was formidable, her mind sharp, and her presence commanding, even in pain. He realized that he was not just saving someone, he was protecting a force of incredible power. Hours passed as they navigated the rugged terrain. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the rocks. Ethan's hands were sore, his muscles burned, but he refused to stop. He talked to the Queen as they moved, describing his world, his home, his small life among the stars. She listened silently, occasionally responding in her language or with subtle gestures. For the first time, Ethan felt a sense of purpose beyond survival. He was not just helping someone injured. He was forming a bond that transcended language, species, and experience. It was a human connection in its purest form: compassion, trust, and courage in the face of danger. As night fell, they reached the canyon. It offered shelter but not safety. Ethan quickly set up a makeshift perimeter using rocks, debris, and whatever scraps of technology he had. The Queen helped as much as she could, her movements precise despite her injuries. Ethan realized that she was not merely cooperative, she was strategizing, thinking several steps ahead even while weak. They settled into a small alcove, hidden from view. Ethan applied final touches to her bandages and checked her vitals. Her pulse remained strong, her breathing steady. She gave him a small nod, the first clear acknowledgement of trust he had received from her. "You're going to be okay now," Ethan whispered. "I'll keep you safe." The Queen's eyes softened for the briefest moment, an expression that conveyed more than words ever could. Despite the danger outside, a fragile peace settled over them. Ethan knew this was only the beginning of their journey. Whoever was hunting her would not stop, and their path ahead would be filled with peril. Yet for now there was survival, there was trust, there was humanity, and in this desolate corner of the galaxy that was enough. As Ethan watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky, he felt a quiet determination settle in his chest. He had saved her life today. He did not yet know who she truly was or what she could do, but he knew this. Humans had a way of making a difference, even against overwhelming odds. And that difference, he realized, might just change the course of the galaxy. The night on the desolate planet was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that pressed against the skin, making every sound seem louder. Ethan sat near the small alcove, checking his makeshift perimeter for any signs of movement. He had managed to stabilize the alien queen's injuries for the moment, but her wounds were still severe. He could feel the tension in his muscles from hours of moving and helping her, yet he refused to rest fully. Danger could arrive at any moment. The queen lay nearby, her head resting on a small bundle of cloth and debris that Ethan had fashioned into a pillow. Her breathing was steady, but there was a faint tremor in her fingers. Ethan watched her carefully. She was unlike anyone he had ever encountered. Even in her weakened state, there was a strength in her posture, a sharpness in her eyes, and a deliberate calculation in her movements. She wasn't simply reacting to the world, she was analyzing it. Ethan spoke softly. "You're safe for now. I'll make sure no one finds you." The queen tilted her head slightly, her golden eyes glimmering in the dim light. She did not respond with words, but her gaze was intense, measuring, almost as if she was judging him. Ethan met her eyes, unsure if she understood him or if she simply recognized the sound of his voice as harmless. Hours passed. Ethan stayed close, occasionally whispering reassurances and checking the bandages he had applied earlier. He gave her sips of water and tiny bites of nutrient paste. She accepted them without complaint, a subtle acknowledgement of trust. Finally, she moved, sitting up slowly. Ethan immediately shifted closer, careful not to startle her. "You should rest," he said. She shook her head, her expression unreadable. Then she looked toward the horizon, where faint lights glimmered in the distance. Ethan followed her gaze and felt a cold shiver. The lights were ships, their engines humming faintly through the night. They were searching, and whatever or whoever was in those ships knew exactly what they were looking for. Ethan took a deep breath. "They're coming," he said, his voice low. "We need to move again." The queen stood, moving with surprising agility despite her injuries. Ethan helped her, supporting her with one arm around her waist. She did not resist. Instead, she seemed to anticipate his movements, adjusting her weight and balance with precise timing. Together, they began moving through the rocky terrain, keeping low and using the shadows for cover. As they walked, Ethan tried to make sense of her. "Why are they after you? Who are you?" She turned her head slightly, speaking a few words in her melodic, unfamiliar language. Ethan shook his head, frustrated. "I don't understand. You'll have to show me." She raised her hand and made a series of gestures, pointing to herself and then to the approaching lights. Ethan realized she was trying to convey that the ships were hunting her specifically. The detail, the precision, and the fear in her expression told him enough. This was no ordinary alien. She was someone important, someone powerful, someone dangerous if provoked. Despite the danger, Ethan felt a strange calm. He had faced challenges before. He had treated wounded soldiers, faced hostile environments, and survived situations others would have considered impossible. But this was different. This was about protecting someone whose very existence could change the balance of power in the galaxy. The queen paused and looked at him again, her gaze lingering. For a moment, Ethan thought he saw something he could not name, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps, or a spark of recognition. She was aware of him, of his presence, in a way that went beyond simple awareness. It unsettled him, but also made him feel connected, like they shared an understanding beyond words. They continued moving through the night, careful to avoid open areas where the ships could detect them. The terrain was unforgiving, jagged rocks and deep fissures threatening to trip them at every step. Ethan's muscles burned from the effort, but he did not complain. The Queen's strength and determination were evident in every step she took, even as her injuries slowed her slightly. At one point, they reached a narrow ledge overlooking a small valley. Ethan crouched, using a piece of metal debris as a makeshift binocular. The ships were still there, scanning systematically, but they had not yet detected the alcove they had left behind. He motioned to the Queen to stay low. "We need to keep moving," he whispered. "They'll search here eventually." She nodded once, her expression serious. Then, without warning, she moved forward with surprising speed, silently scaling a nearby rock face to get a better view of the area. Ethan watched her, amazed. Even in her weakened state, she had strength, agility, and balance that no ordinary human could match. From her vantage point, she studied the ships below. She made subtle gestures with her hands, as if calculating trajectories or distances. Ethan realized that she was not only assessing the threat, she was planning, analyzing, strategizing. She was thinking several steps ahead, even while injured. Ethan's respect for her grew with every passing moment. He had always admired intelligence and strength, but seeing them combined in someone so fierce, and yet so vulnerable, made him feel both awe and responsibility. He knew that protecting her was more than a matter of survival. It was a matter of preserving something extraordinary. After a few tense moments, the Queen returned to his side. She did not speak, but her eyes met his, conveying understanding. Together, they moved down the ledge and continued along the edge of the valley, careful to remain hidden. The night dragged on, and Ethan realized that they needed more than just cover. They needed a plan. He scanned the terrain, noting areas where they could hide, narrow passages where ships could not follow, and natural obstacles they could use to their advantage. "Listen," he said quietly. "We can use the canyon ahead. It's narrow enough that they can't land ships inside. If we can get there, we'll have time to rest and treat your wounds properly." The Queen tilted her head, studying him. Then she gestured forward, indicating agreement. She did not speak, but Ethan could sense her approval. She trusted him enough to follow his plan, even though he was only a human, and she was someone of immense power. They moved cautiously toward the canyon, the sound of distant engines always present in the background. Every step required attention, every movement calculated. Ethan found himself relying on the Queen's instincts as much as his own. She pointed out unstable rocks, dangerous slopes, and areas where they could leave false trails to mislead the ships. Her knowledge of terrain, strategy, and evasion was remarkable, even if he did not yet understand the full extent of her abilities. By the time they reached the canyon, dawn was breaking. The sky was a dull gray, the dust settling from the night winds. Ethan helped the Queen into a sheltered spot within the canyon where they could finally rest for a short while. He knelt beside her, checking her injuries again. "We're safe for now," he said. "I'll treat your wounds properly, and then we can plan our next move." The Queen allowed him to work, her expression calm but focused. She did not speak, but her presence was commanding, even in silence. Ethan felt a strange sense of respect and admiration. She was powerful, intelligent, and aware of dangers he could not even begin to imagine. Yet here she was, vulnerable and dependent on him. As he cleaned and bandaged her wounds, Ethan began to ask more questions. "Who are you? Why are they after you? What's happening out there?" The Queen looked at him, her golden eyes meeting his. She spoke a few words in her language and then paused. Ethan shook his head. I don't understand. Try showing me. Draw it or gesture it, anything. She gestured toward the horizon, then back to herself, then to him. Ethan pieced it together. She was the target, they were hunting her, and somehow he was now part of the equation. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. Protecting her was no longer just about saving a life. It was about survival against forces he could barely comprehend. Despite the danger, he felt a sense of purpose. He had been in situations like this before, but never with stakes so high. This was no ordinary mission. This was about preserving something extraordinary, and he would not fail. Hours passed, and they rested in the canyon. The queen remained alert, her senses seemingly aware of every movement, every sound. Ethan watched her, noticing the subtle ways she adjusted her posture, the way her eyes scanned the terrain, the quiet strength in her breathing. Even in rest, she was extraordinary. Ethan finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. He looked at her and realized that he was not just protecting an alien, he was protecting a force that could change the galaxy. And yet, despite all that, she allowed him to care for her. She trusted him. That trust was powerful, more powerful than any weapon he could imagine. As the sun rose higher, casting light into the canyon, Ethan made a quiet promise to himself. He would protect her, no matter what. He would use his skills, his knowledge, and his human determination to keep her alive. He did not yet know who she truly was, or the power she wielded, but he knew this. Humanity had a way of making a difference, even against impossible odds. The queen stirred slightly, her golden eyes opening to meet his. Ethan gave her a small smile. "We'll get through this," he said softly. "Together." For the first time, the queen seemed to acknowledge him fully, a subtle nod that conveyed understanding, agreement, and perhaps something more. In that moment, the bond between them was clear, a bond of trust, of survival, and of something beyond simple words. Outside the canyon, the faint hum of engines reminded them that danger was never far away. But inside, in that narrow shelter, there was a moment of calm, a moment of connection, and a moment of hope. Ethan knew the challenges ahead would be greater than anything he had faced before, but he also knew that he and the queen, together, had a chance to survive. And for a human in the vast galaxy, sometimes a chance was all you needed. The canyon offered some shelter, but Ethan knew it was temporary. The alien queen beside him, still weak but clearly recovering, kept her eyes on the horizon, where faint glimmers of movement hinted at the presence of ships. Ethan had learned to trust her instincts. Even in her weakened state, she seemed to sense threats before they appeared. They spent the morning assessing their situation. Ethan cleaned her wounds again, rebandaging deep cuts and burns, carefully using his medical knowledge to prevent infection. The queen sat silently, watching him work, her golden eyes fixed on every movement. There was a strange intelligence in her gaze, as if she were memorizing his techniques, learning from him even while injured. "You have an unusual skill," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "You work with precision." Ethan blinked. It was the first time she had spoken in a language he could partially understand. "I'm a medic," he replied cautiously. "I've treated many injuries. Yours are complicated, but we'll manage." She nodded slowly. "You are different from others I have encountered." Most would hesitate, most would flee. Her voice carried a weight Ethan couldn't place, as if she had seen entire fleets of beings and judged them all. "You stay. You care." Ethan felt a flush of surprise. "I'm not doing this for praise, I can't leave someone in pain." The queen studied him, her gaze unwavering. Then, with a subtle gesture, she indicated the canyon walls. Ethan followed her gaze and realized she was suggesting a new path, a route that would provide better cover from the ships above. She was guiding him, giving directions even though she was injured. He adjusted their plan. "All right," he said, helping her to her feet. "We move and we stay low. Follow me and we can make it to that ridge." From there, we'll have better control of our movements and maybe even a chance to set traps." The queen moved carefully, each step deliberate. Even with her injuries, she displayed strength and agility that belied her weakened appearance. Ethan kept close, supporting her when needed, but he noticed she preferred to move on her own whenever possible. As they navigated the narrow paths, the queen began to demonstrate more of her abilities. She could sense subtle changes in the terrain, pointing out loose rocks, unstable edges, and areas where the mercenaries' sensors might pick up heat signatures. Ethan realized she was not just guiding him. She was teaching him, showing him how to move, how to think, how to anticipate threats. For the first time, he saw a glimpse of the woman behind the injuries, a strategist, a fighter, a queen in every sense of the word. Yet she allowed him to lead in other ways, to make decisions, to protect her. There was an unspoken partnership forming, a balance between human ingenuity and alien brilliance. They paused at a narrow ledge, the canyon opening up to a wider valley below. Ethan took a moment to catch his breath, scanning the horizon. The ships were still out there, searching methodically, but they had not yet found the alcove or their trail. The queen knelt beside him, her hands hovering over a small device she had carried hidden in her clothing. It was faintly glowing, covered in intricate markings. Ethan leaned closer. "What is that?" She looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she pressed a series of buttons, and a faint holographic map appeared, showing the positions of the ships in real time. Ethan's eyes widened. The technology was beyond anything he had seen. "They are searching systematically," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We have time, but not much. We must move before they discover the canyon." Ethan nodded, impressed and slightly intimidated. "Lead the way, I'll follow." Together they moved with precision. The queen guided him through hidden paths, over rocky outcroppings, and into narrow crevices that offered cover. Ethan set small traps along the way, using scraps of debris and the limited technology he carried. They were simple, improvised devices, but he hoped they would slow the hunters long enough to escape. As they advanced, Ethan noticed the queen observing him carefully. "You are clever," she said. "Most would not think to use these methods. Humans are unpredictable." Ethan smiled faintly. Unpredictable can be an advantage sometimes. She tilted her head, considering his words. Then she nodded. "Yes, unpredictable. Perhaps that is why you survive while others do not." The bond between them grew stronger with each passing hour. They communicated in a mixture of gestures, broken words, and shared understanding. Ethan taught her small things about human survival, how to improvise traps, how to use the environment to their advantage, how to conserve energy. In return, she taught him subtle strategies, ways to read the terrain, ways to anticipate the movements of intelligent opponents. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon that led to a hidden valley. Ethan paused, taking in the view. The valley was sheltered, with high walls that would block the sensors of the approaching ships. It was perfect for rest, recovery, and planning their next move. They entered the valley cautiously, the queen moving ahead to scout while Ethan followed. She signaled him to stop several times, pointing out hidden dangers and weak spots in the terrain. He marveled at her knowledge, her ability to anticipate threats even while recovering from severe injuries. Finally, they reached a small natural cave at the base of the valley. Ethan helped the queen inside, setting up a place where she could rest more comfortably. He cleaned her wounds again, using water from a small reservoir he had found nearby. She winced slightly, but did not complain. "You do much for me," she said quietly. "Most would not." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not most, I do what I can." She studied him for a long moment. "You are not just skilled, you are brave. Humans are strange. You fight not for power, not for glory, but for life itself." Ethan felt a warmth in his chest. He had always believed in helping others, but hearing her words, coming from someone so formidable, made him realize that humanity's strength was more than just physical or technological. It was moral. It was courage, compassion, and resilience. The afternoon passed slowly. The Queen rested while Ethan prepared their shelter. He found additional debris to reinforce the entrance, set up small alarms to warn of approaching footsteps, and carefully arranged supplies. Despite the Queen's presence, he worked quietly, aware that the slightest sound could give away their position. As the day turned to evening, Ethan realized he had learned more about the Queen than he had expected. She had shared small details about her travels, her battles, and her observations of the galaxy. Even in fragments of her language, her intelligence and experience were clear. She was a ruler, a strategist, a warrior, but she was also capable of trust, of recognizing good intentions, of forming bonds. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley. Ethan sat beside the Queen, checking her bandages one last time. She seemed quieter now, more contemplative. Her eyes glimmered faintly in the dim light, reflecting both strength and vulnerability. "You trust me," she said finally, her voice soft. Ethan nodded. "Yes, I trust you too. We're in this together, and I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." She studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod of acknowledgement. It was the first time she had shown something approaching a smile, subtle but genuine. Ethan felt a strange sense of pride and relief. They had survived the night, navigated dangerous terrain, and avoided detection. It was a small victory, but an important one. Outside the cave, the hum of distant engines reminded them that danger had not passed. Ethan glanced toward the horizon, his mind already working on their next move. The bounty hunters were persistent, intelligent, and well-equipped, but so were they. Human ingenuity combined with the Queen's brilliance was a formidable force. The evening stretched on. Ethan shared stories of his home on Earth, his childhood, and the small, ordinary moments that had shaped him. The Queen listened, occasionally asking questions in her melodic language, which Ethan did his best to answer. There was a quiet intimacy in these exchanges, a sense of shared understanding and connection. As night fell, Ethan prepared a small fire using a portable energy source. The warmth was comforting, and the Queen seemed to relax slightly. She had allowed him to tend to her injuries, to plan their path, and to speak openly. It was clear that she trusted him in a way no one else had earned. Ethan reflected on the journey so far. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and exhaustion, yet they had survived. He realized that survival was not just about strength or technology. It was about partnership, trust, and quick thinking. Humanity, he thought, had a way of making the impossible possible. The Queen stirred again, sitting up to observe the stars above. Ethan watched her, noting the faint glow in her eyes as she studied the night sky. There was a wisdom there, a knowledge of the galaxy and its countless dangers. Yet she allowed herself to rest, to rely on him, to accept his help. Ethan knew that the challenges ahead would be greater than anything they had faced so far. The bounty hunters would not give up easily, and the Queen's identity, though still mostly a mystery to him, would make her a target across the galaxy. But for now they had a moment of peace, a chance to heal, and a bond that would carry them through the trials to come. He sat beside her, speaking quietly about small, human things, memories, hopes, and the simple beauty of life in the galaxy. She listened, her expression thoughtful. In these moments, Ethan realized something profound. Humanity's strength was not just in technology or numbers. It was in the ability to care, to trust, and to endure. And for the alien Queen beside him, that humanity was a force she had never expected to encounter. The morning sun barely touched the canyon floor when Ethan woke. The alien Queen beside him had already risen, sitting in quiet observation of the valley. She was stronger now, her breathing steady and her movements deliberate. Though still injured, she exuded an aura of control and authority that Ethan could not ignore. He had come to realize that she was more than just a survivor. She was a leader, someone used to command and strategy. Ethan moved quietly, fetching water and preparing a simple breakfast of nutrient paste. The queen watched him, her golden eyes following every motion. There was a curiosity in her gaze, a careful consideration. Ethan felt the weight of it, but it was not intimidating. Rather, it was a recognition, a measure of respect for what he had done and what he was capable of. "You are ready to move soon," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "The hunters will not wait." Ethan nodded. "I know, we have to stay ahead of them or they will catch us. I've been thinking about a plan, using the terrain to our advantage, but I need your help." She gave a small nod and gestured for him to continue. Ethan explained his idea, using the canyon's twists and hidden paths to slow their pursuers, setting up decoys and traps along the way, and reaching a larger ridge where they could control the battlefield if necessary. The queen listened intently, her expression thoughtful. "You think like a human," she said finally. "Clever, resourceful, adaptable, that is, useful." Ethan smiled faintly. "I have to be. We're up against better-equipped forces than us." She stood, moving with surprising ease. Ethan reached out to steady her, but she waved him off. "I am strong enough," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "You have done well to bring me this far. Now we move forward together." They began their journey along the hidden paths, keeping low and silent. Ethan set small traps and markers to confuse anyone following them. The queen moved beside him, her senses alert. She pointed out loose rocks, weak ledges, and areas where sensors might detect them. Her guidance was precise, almost instinctive, and Ethan marveled at her skill. As they advanced, Ethan realized he was learning from her as much as she was learning from him. She taught him to observe subtle changes in the environment, to predict danger before it appeared, and to think several steps ahead. Her knowledge was not just tactical, it was intuitive, a combination of experience, intelligence, and raw instinct. After several hours, they reached a narrow ridge overlooking a larger valley. From this vantage point, they could see the faint outlines of the pursuing ships below. Ethan crouched, scanning the scene. The hunters were closing in, moving systematically, but the queen's eyes remained calm, unflinching. "We can use this position," she said. "We can control the field. You have set traps." "Yes," Ethan replied. "Simple ones, but they should slow them down." The queen nodded. "Good, we will use the terrain and your ingenuity. Together, we will be difficult to defeat." They prepared the ridge, setting up obstacles and using natural features to create barriers. Ethan worked quickly, knowing that time was limited. The queen moved beside him, offering subtle guidance and occasionally assisting with tasks that required strength or precision. Even weakened, she was a formidable presence. As they worked, Ethan's curiosity grew. He had known for some time that she was extraordinary, but he still did not know the full extent of her identity. He decided to ask carefully. "Who are you, really?" he said quietly. "I know you're not just any alien. You're someone important. I need to understand who I'm protecting." The queen studied him for a long moment, her golden eyes reflecting both caution and consideration. Then, slowly, she spoke. "I am Queen Seraphina of the Orient Empire." Ethan froze. He had heard stories of the Orient Queen. She was said to be ruthless, brilliant, and feared across the galaxy. The idea that he had been protecting her without knowing it made his chest tighten. Yet despite her fearsome reputation, he saw no arrogance in her expression, only a quiet intensity, a measured strength. You're the queen?" he asked, still in disbelief. "Yes," she replied, "and now you know, but do not fear me, I am not here to harm you. You have shown me kindness, something I have rarely encountered. That is why you are alive beside me." Ethan felt a mixture of awe and responsibility. "I never expected this. I just did what I thought was right. I didn't know who you were." Seraphina studied him, her expression thoughtful. "That is exactly why I trust you. You act without fear, without expectation of reward. That is rare, even among humans." For the first time, Ethan realized that his actions had meaning beyond survival. His compassion, his courage, and his willingness to act had earned him the trust of one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. He felt a quiet pride, tempered by the understanding that their danger was far from over. The distant hum of engines reminded them that the hunters were still nearby. Ethan checked his traps one last time. Serafina moved beside him, her presence commanding yet calm. Together, they watched the valley below, waiting for the first signs of pursuit. When the ships finally appeared, they moved cautiously, unaware of the obstacles Ethan had set. Small energy pulses and improvised alarms went off, alerting the hunters but also confusing them. Serafina's eyes narrowed and she gestured subtly. Ethan understood. They would wait until the right moment. The hunters descended further into the valley, following false trails created by Ethan's traps. Serafina moved silently beside him, her golden eyes focused and calculating. Ethan realized that he was witnessing something extraordinary, a human and a queen working together seamlessly, combining ingenuity, strength, and strategy. Hours passed in tense silence. Ethan adjusted traps and monitored the hunters' movements. Serafina studied them, offering guidance and insight. Every step was calculated, every action deliberate. They were a team, each relying on the other's abilities. Finally, the hunters reached the point where the traps were most concentrated. Explosions of sound and light went off, confusing their sensors and forcing them to halt. Ethan and Serafina watched carefully from the ridge, waiting for the right moment to strike. When the opportunity came, Serafina moved with incredible speed and precision. She used her strength and agility to disable small groups of hunters, moving with a grace that was almost otherworldly. Ethan followed her lead, using his traps and quick thinking to create openings and misdirect the remaining enemies. The battle was tense, but their coordination was flawless. Serafina's instincts and experience guided them, while Ethan's ingenuity and resourcefulness turned simple tools into effective weapons. They pushed the hunters back, forcing them to retreat from the valley. When the dust settled, Ethan and Serafina stood together on the ridge, breathing heavily but victorious. The hunters had been delayed, their pursuit temporarily halted. Ethan looked at Serafina, awestruck. "That was incredible. You fought like nothing I've ever seen." Serafina's expression softened slightly. "And you contributed. Your human ingenuity turned simple tools into effective measures. Without it, we might not have survived." Ethan felt a deep sense of pride. They had survived, not just because of strength or skill, but because they had worked together, combining their unique abilities. He realized that humanity had a power that could not be measured in weapons or ships, the power of courage, intelligence, and determination. As night fell, they moved deeper into the valley, finding a new shelter where they could rest and recover. Serafina allowed Ethan to tend to her wounds again, showing trust and respect. For the first time, she spoke more freely, sharing fragments of her past, her battles, and her empire. Ethan listened, absorbing every word, understanding more about the stakes they faced and the importance of their mission. Despite her fearsome reputation, Ethan saw a side of Serafina that few had ever witnessed. A ruler capable of compassion, a strategist willing to trust, and a being who recognized the value of human qualities. He realized that their partnership was more than survival, it was a meeting of strengths, a collaboration that could shape the outcome of the galaxy. The night was quiet once more. Ethan sat beside Serafina, speaking softly about human life, stories of Earth, and simple joys. She listened, occasionally asking questions, her voice curious and thoughtful. In these moments, Ethan understood that their bond went beyond necessity. It was built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. Outside, the stars twinkled, indifferent to the struggles below. Ethan felt a renewed sense of determination. The hunters would return, stronger and more prepared, but he was no longer just a human alone in the galaxy. He had an ally, a queen whose brilliance and strength were matched by her willingness to trust him. Together, they were formidable. Together, they had a chance not just to survive, but to outsmart and overcome any challenge the galaxy could throw at them. Ethan watched Serafina closely as she leaned back against the rocks, her golden eyes reflecting the starlight. He realized that this was just the beginning. The journey ahead would be dangerous, filled with unknowns and threats beyond imagination. Yet he felt confident, strengthened by the bond they had formed, and inspired by the extraordinary being beside him. For the first time, Ethan truly understood the meaning of partnership, trust, and the unique power of humanity. And Serafina, the galaxy's most feared queen, began to see the value of human courage, intelligence, and compassion in a way she had never experienced before. The night deepened and they rested, each aware of the dangers ahead but also of the strength they drew from one another. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now there was calm. For now there was hope. And in the vast galaxy, hope was sometimes the most powerful weapon of all. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Ethan woke, stretching stiff muscles and scanning the valley. The alien queen, Serafina, sat nearby, her golden eyes alert as if she had not slept at all. Her recovery was progressing steadily, and the intensity in her gaze suggested that she had already begun thinking about their next moves. Ethan rose quietly, preparing a small meal of nutrient paste and water. Serafina accepted it silently, her presence commanding yet calm. They had survived the first wave of pursuers, but Ethan knew that the bounty hunters would not give up so easily. They were persistent, trained, and determined, and they had no idea whom they were hunting. "We cannot stay here for long," Ethan said quietly. "They'll search this valley again, and next time they'll be ready," Serafina nodded. "Agreed. We move to higher ground. From there we can plan our next steps and anticipate their movements. Your knowledge of human tactics has been useful. I trust your judgment." Ethan felt a flicker of pride but also a sense of weight on his shoulders. The queen of a galactic empire trusted him. He had never imagined that he would be in a situation like this, surviving, strategizing, and protecting one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Yet he also knew that failure was not an option. They moved carefully through the canyon, using the natural cover to conceal themselves from any approaching enemies. Ethan continued to set simple traps, using rocks, debris, and improvised sensors to delay or confuse any pursuers. Serafina guided him with subtle gestures, pointing out weak spots in the terrain, potential ambush points, and areas where they could use the environment to their advantage. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher. Finally, they reached a ridge that overlooked a larger expanse of terrain, a natural fortress. From this vantage point, Ethan could see the valley below, dotted with the faint glimmers of energy signatures that indicated approaching ships. The hunters were coming, and this would be their final stand. Ethan checked the traps and improvised defenses one last time. Serafina moved beside him, her presence a mix of calm confidence and commanding authority. Even injured, she radiated power and intelligence, and Ethan felt a deep sense of responsibility to protect her. "They are coming," he said softly, his eyes scanning the horizon. Serafina's gaze followed his. "I can see them. We will fight together. Your ingenuity and my strategy will be enough to overcome them." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. The hunters approached cautiously, unaware of the full extent of the obstacles that awaited them. Small traps went off, sending sparks and energy pulses into the air, confusing their sensors and forcing them to slow down. Ethan and Serafina remained hidden, observing every movement, waiting for the perfect moment to act. When the hunters reached the point where the ridge narrowed, Serafina gave a subtle signal. Ethan sprang into action, using improvised projectiles to trigger more traps and create chaos among the enemy ranks. Serafina moved with precision and speed, disabling several hunters with well-placed strikes and careful use of her strength. Ethan realized that their coordination was flawless. They had worked together seamlessly for days, combining human ingenuity with alien skill. The hunters, despite their training, were struggling against this unexpected alliance. Each move Ethan made was anticipated by Serafina, and each action she took created openings that Ethan exploited. The battle intensified as more hunters tried to approach, but Ethan and Serafina had prepared for this. They used the terrain to their advantage, creating choke points where the enemy could not easily pass. Ethan's trap slowed them, forcing them into predictable paths, while Serafina's strikes disabled key operatives. Hours passed in tense silence punctuated by sudden bursts of action. Ethan marveled at the Queen's precision, strength, and intelligence. Even with her injuries, she fought like a being far beyond human capabilities. Yet she never acted recklessly. Every move was calculated, every strike purposeful. Finally, the remaining hunters realized that they could not overcome the combined force of human ingenuity and alien power. They began to retreat, leaving the battlefield to Ethan and Serafina. Ethan lowered his makeshift weapon, breathing heavily, and looked at the Queen. You're incredible," he said, awestruck. "I never thought I'd see anyone fight like that." Serafina's expression softened slightly, a rare smile touching her lips. "And you, human, have shown courage, intelligence, and determination. Without you, this outcome would not have been possible. You are remarkable." Ethan felt a warmth in his chest. He had acted from instinct and compassion, never expecting recognition, yet here it was, from one of the most feared beings in the galaxy. He realized that humanity's strength was more than physical. It was in courage, adaptability, and the will to do what is right. As the sun set, casting golden light across the ridge, Ethan and Serafina surveyed the valley below. The threat had passed, at least for now, but they both knew that the galaxy would continue to test them. The bounty hunters were not the only danger. Serafina's enemies were vast, and her position as queen made her a target across countless star systems. Ethan cleaned and bandaged her wounds again, ensuring that she was fully rested and prepared for the next challenges. Serafina allowed him to work, her trust in him evident. For the first time, she spoke more openly about her empire, the enemies she faced, and the alliances she had forged. Ethan listened carefully, absorbing every detail, understanding the complexity of the galaxy and the stakes of their survival. Despite the gravity of the situation, there was a sense of calm between them. They had faced impossible odds, relied on each other's strengths, and survived. The bond they had formed was unspoken but undeniable, a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. Night fell, and Ethan and Serafina rested in the ridge's hidden shelter. Ethan spoke quietly, sharing stories of Earth, humanity's resilience, and the small, ordinary moments that made life worth living. Serafina listened, her expression thoughtful, occasionally asking questions. In these moments, Ethan realized that trust and understanding could be as powerful as any weapon. The stars shone brightly above, indifferent to the struggles below. Yet for Ethan and Serafina, the galaxy felt a little smaller, a little more manageable. Together, they had faced danger, survived, and learned to rely on each other's strengths. Humanity and alien brilliance had combined to create a force neither could have achieved alone. In the quiet moments of the night, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had not just protected a queen, he had demonstrated the potential of humanity, the courage, intelligence, and compassion that could change outcomes even in the vastness of space. And Serafina, the galaxy's most feared queen, had begun to see the value of human qualities in a way she had never experienced before. The next morning, they prepared to move again. The bounty hunters might return, but Ethan was no longer just a human alone in the galaxy. He had an ally, a queen whose strength and brilliance were matched by her willingness to trust him. Together, they were formidable, capable of overcoming challenges that would have seemed impossible to either alone. Ethan adjusted his makeshift equipment and checked the traps one last time. Serafina stood beside him, fully recovered and ready. Her eyes glimmered with determination and intelligence, and Ethan felt a sense of awe and respect. "Are you ready?" he asked. Serafina nodded. "Yes." "Together we move forward. The galaxy awaits, and we will face it as one." They descended from the ridge, moving with careful precision through the terrain. The valley below was quiet, but Ethan knew that threats were never far. Each step required attention, each movement calculated. Yet, despite the dangers, there was a sense of confidence. They had survived, they had learned, and they had forged a partnership that could withstand anything. As they moved, Ethan realized that he had changed. He was no longer just a human trying to survive in a dangerous galaxy. He was a protector, a strategist, and a partner to one of the most powerful beings in the universe. His courage, intelligence, and compassion had been recognized, and he had proven that humanity's greatest strength lay not in weapons or numbers, but in the ability to act with honor and purpose. Serafina glanced at him, her golden eyes reflecting the sunlight. There was respect there, trust, and a subtle acknowledgement of the bond they had formed. Ethan felt a deep sense of pride and responsibility. He knew that the days ahead would bring challenges, but he also knew that together they could face anything. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, filled with possibilities and dangers alike. Ethan and Serafina moved forward, side by side, united by trust, courage, and determination. The galaxy was vast and uncertain, but they were ready. They were stronger together, and their combined strengths would shape the future in ways neither could have imagined alone. Ethan glanced at Serafina one last time as they continued their journey. The queen of the Orient Empire, fierce and brilliant, and the human who had healed her wounds, fought beside her and gained her trust. They were a team unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. And as they disappeared into the vast expanse of stars, both understood that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was waiting, and humanity, through one man's courage and ingenuity, had already begun to leave its mark.